Gen Alpha is anyone born after 2009, which is kind of crazy. I mean, I'm an '06 baby. This is insane to me. But anyways, last Iceberg, we went over the Gen Z internet trauma. This time we're doing Gen Alpha. And one of the things that I'm a little bit embarrassed about, guys, I'm gonna level with you, is that some of these entries on this iceberg, I remember from when I was a kid. So if you're Gen Z, you might also remember some of these things because this is not at all Gen Alpha exclusive. I was born in '06 and I still remember a lot of these things growing up. In fact, I tried to pick out the ones that I remember the most because I have more fun writing it, so it's gonna be a better video. But anyway, I hope that you're excited for this video. I love making this kind of video. Thank you guys for the support on the last one. And yeah, let's get into this. You know, follow my Instagram, join my Discord, all that good stuff. But yeah, let's start this iceberg. 3 a.m. challenges. The 3 a.m. challenges were a huge deal on YouTube, especially for younger kids from Gen Z and Gen Alpha. These videos claimed that 3 a.m., known as the witching hour, was when spooky and paranormal things were most likely to happen. The creators would usually pick something creepy or forbidden to do at that time, like summoning a ghost, calling a fictional character, or messing around with some supposedly cursed object, and film the whole thing as if it were real. These videos always had a specific vibe, dramatic, over the top, and full of eerie music or dim lighting. The creators would act like they were genuinely terrified, claiming to hear strange noises, see shadows, or have objects mysteriously move on their own. Of course, it was all staged, but if you were a kid watching these, it didn't always feel that way. The creators were great at making it seem real enough to give you chills, especially if you were already watching it in the dark. Some of the most popular 3 a.m. challenges included calling characters like Pennywise, Sonic.exe, or even Slenderman, and the creators would fake getting creepy text messages or phone calls from them. A few even went further, claiming to summon spirits like Bloody Mary or to use ghost detecting apps that proved there were paranormal entities around. These videos leaned into internet legends and urban myths, which made them even scarier for younger audiences who were already familiar with these stories. At the height of the trend, certain YouTubers became known for pumping out these kinds of videos almost daily. They exaggerated everything: big reactions, creepy edits, and fake evidence of something supernatural happening. But even though it was all fake, the younger audiences ate it up, and these videos racked up millions of views. Not everyone was a fan though. Critics pointed out that the creators were clearly targeting little kids, sometimes with content that could actually scare them pretty badly. Plus, some of the challenges encouraged unsafe behavior, like wandering around outside late at night or playing with stuff like candles or matches in a dark room. I mean, it was obvious to older people that these videos weren't meant to be taken seriously, but that didn't stop some kids from trying to copy what they saw. Eventually, the trend died out as kids got older and realized how fake the whole thing was. But for the kids who grew up watching them, 3 a.m. challenges were a weird mix of fun and terrifying. Sometimes they'd binge watch with their friends while low-key feeling scared to even look at their phones after. These videos might not hold up today, but back then they were a huge part of the YouTube scene and left a lasting impact on the kids who got sucked into them. FNAF tapes. The Five Nights at Freddy's VHS tapes were an absolute game changer for fans of the franchise who wanted something darker, more personal, and genuinely terrifying. These videos, especially the ones created by Squimpus McGrimpus, turned the series' lore into something that felt like it crawled out of your worst nightmares. They didn't just add context to the story, they made the horror feel real. If the games hinted at tragedy, the tapes showed it in brutal, unflinching detail. What made these tapes so memorable was how they tackled the story's core, which really was the kids who were murdered and then trapped in animatronics. See, in the games, it was easy to forget just how horrifying that premise was, because it was buried under Easter eggs and inside cryptic hints. The VHS tapes didn't hold back though. They focused on that pain, that fear, and that isolation of the kids in a way that felt real and raw. You could almost feel their claustrophobia as they were forced to live in these metal suits, their souls unable to move on. One of the standout moments was the Fazbear Entertainment video manual. What started as a dry instructional guide for disassembling animatronics quickly spiraled into horror with blood splatters and distorted commands to, quote, climb inside and accept your fate. That was the kind of horror that stuck with you. It wasn't about the jump scares or anything like that. It was just about the sheer weight of the implications. It was the first time the story's central tragedy, the murdered children, was really brought to life in a way that made you sit there, unsettled. The series leaned heavily into the analog horror aesthetic. The grainy visuals, distorted audio, and eerie, lost footage vibe made it feel like you were watching something you weren't supposed to see. The Bonnie joint movement testing tape was a great example of this. What started out as a mechanical test of an animatronic's movements quickly turned sinister, with abrupt cuts to disturbing imagery and the screeching voice of the puppet. These weren't just creepy, they felt like they had been recorded in a cursed timeline, one where the events of Five Nights at Freddy's actually happened. Squimpus McGrimpus wasn't just retelling the story from the games though, the tapes built their own narrative. Characters like the puppet and William Afton, the murderer, were given new layers of complexity. It wasn't just about haunted animatronics anymore, it was about what these souls were feeling and how their pain shaped their actions. One of the most haunting tapes was Sound Response Check, where Chica's voice described the despair of being trapped, comparing it to the nightmare of suffocating in some snow. The games never gave you that kind of emotional gut punch. The tapes also expanded on William Afton's sinister presence. He wasn't just the shadowy killer from the games anymore, he was a looming, malevolent force, leaving cryptic messages for his son, Michael, and haunting the souls of his victims. The dynamic between Michael, the children's spirits, and Afton became the heart of the series. The children wanted justice, Afton wanted to escape, and Michael was caught in the middle, haunted by his family's dark legacy. The FNAF VHS tapes were special because they didn't just tell stories, they made you feel like you'd stumbled across something that you shouldn't have seen. One of the creepiest tapes was Pirate Cove pre-show. It started innocently enough, with Foxy hyping up his pirate-themed performance, something you'd expect in a place like Freddy's, but as the tape went on, the vibe shifted. The footage became glitchy, Foxy's dialogue got more distorted, and suddenly the children watching in the background began to vanish, one by one. It wasn't just scary, it was the kind of horror that sneaks up on you, making you uncomfortable without outright explaining why. By the end, you were left staring at this twisted version of Foxy, almost like he was aware of what just happened, but didn't care. That's what these tapes did so well. They took these seemingly harmless characters and turned them into something that you'd see in your nightmares. And it wasn't just about the visuals either, it was the way the sound design worked. Whether it was distorted children's laughter, static that cut out at just the right moments, or the faint whispers that you weren't sure were really there, it all worked together to make you feel trapped, just like the kids in the story. Another standout was the non-existent video. This one messed with you on a whole different level. It showed a commercial for Fredbear's Family Diner, all cheerful and nostalgic, until it suddenly cut to a horrifying scene of the Fredbear animatronic with blood dripping from its mouth. If you knew the story of the Bite of 83, this hit hard. It was showing you the aftermath of that moment in such a blunt, gruesome way. The tape also broke the fourth wall a bit, with text addressing the viewer directly like it was accusing you of something. It said, quote, "You found the tapes, now you must know the truth," unquote. It didn't feel like the tape was telling a story, it felt like it was trying to pull you into the world of FNAF, like it was blaming you for everything that had happened. And then there was Memories. This one was pure psychological horror. It started with these grainy photos of the old Freddy's locations, all nostalgic and kinda sad. But as it went on, the photos started to change. You'd notice little things like shadows that didn't belong or figures in the background that shouldn't have been there. And then you'd hear William Afton's voice, calm and chilling, confessing to his murders in such a detached way that it made your skin crawl. And this confession wasn't just what he'd done, but it was more about why. He talked about his obsession with his son Michael, how he hated him for what happened to his younger brother, and how killing the other kids was his way of coping. It was so personal and unsettling that it felt wrong to keep listening, but you couldn't look away. These tapes did something the games couldn't always pull off. They made the horror personal. You weren't just watching animatronics come to life, you were seeing the story of the victims, the killer, and the people left behind. They gave you a front row seat to the trauma and the aftermath, which made the whole thing feel way too real. And that's why they still stick with people, even years later. They turned a spooky video game series into something way darker, way more emotional, and way more human. That's what made them so unforgettable. Dumb Ways to Die. The Dumb Ways to Die video was one of those internet sensations that just came out of nowhere and stuck in everyone's head for weeks. or years. Released in 2012 by Metro Trains in Melbourne, Australia, it wasn't just an adorable animated PSA, it was a full-on cultural phenomenon. The whole thing was designed to promote train safety, but it took a really unexpected, borderline absurd approach to get the message across. Instead of using the usual grim warnings or graphic imagery, this video gave us cute bean-shaped characters meeting their ends in the most ridiculous ways possible. The animation was bright and simple, and each dumb way to die was hilariously over the top. You had beans setting their hair on fire, poking a grizzly bear, eating expired glue, and of course, the inevitable classic, pressing a button that says do not press. Each death was weirdly charming with no gore or realism to make it too dark, just goofy little accidents that made you laugh before you even realized what was happening. I remember my introduction to this when I was a kid was I saw the Harry 101 UK's like Portal parody of it when I was like a little kid, and I loved that shit. Anyways, but the kicker was that catchy, cheery song playing in the background. The lyrics laid out all these absurd deaths, but the upbeat tune somehow made it sound like a party anthem. But then came the twist. After you've been laughing at all these silly, avoidable deaths, the tone subtly shifts. It introduces the idea of train safety, and suddenly the stakes feel real. The final beans die in scenarios involving trains, like standing too close to the edge of the platform or running across the tracks, and it clicks that this whole thing has been leading up to this one point. Don't be careless around trains. It was brilliant because the video didn't lecture you, it entertained you first and then hit you with the message later when you were already hooked. The internet absolutely loved it. People shared it like crazy and it became one of those rare viral videos that transcended its original purpose. It spawned memes, parodies, and even a mobile game where you could save the little beans from their dumb choices. Schools used it in safety lessons, and even people that didn't need the train safety message couldn't get the song out of their heads. The video walked this like perfect line between being funny, morbid, and genuinely effective. It's the kind of thing that could have easily fallen flat if it were too preachy or too silly, but instead hit the sweet spot and became an internet classic. And I'm sure it traumatized a bunch of Gen Alphas. Mr. Incredible becoming uncanny. Mr. Incredible becoming uncanny was a straight up fever dream that took over the internet in late 2021 and early 2022. It was one of those trends that made absolutely no sense when you first saw it, but somehow you couldn't stop watching. If you weren't around for it, here's the breakdown. Someone took a still of Mr. Incredible from The Incredibles, you know, the super wholesome Pixar dad, and progressively edited him to look more and more terrifying, like normal to nightmare fuel in just a few steps. It started simple enough. Mr. Incredible slightly zoomed in with an awkward black and white filter slapped on top. But as the sequence continued, his face got all warped and pixelated. Then came the deep fried textures, random glitches, and bloodshot eyes until he looked like something you'd see in a sleep paralysis episode. The final stages were pure chaos. Think melting skin, hollow eyes, and faces you'd expect to jump scare you in an indie horror game. But the real fun wasn't just the uncanny progression, it was how people used it. The format was basically a way to rank your emotional descent in a situation, like, for example, stages of realizing you have a 10,000 word essay due tomorrow, or how I feel as I scroll TikTok at 3 a.m. Each stage of Mr. Incredible's uncanny evolution matched the growing horror of whatever scenario people were talking about. It was weirdly relatable because, let's be real, most of us are just barely holding it together on a good day. Now, most of the videos paired the images with tracks from Everywhere at the End of Time by The Caretaker, an album that's meant to depict the stages of dementia. It starts off as hauntingly nostalgic with warped, crackly ballroom music that feels like a distant memory. But as the progression continues, the music gets more disoriented, fragmented, distorted, and deeply unsettling, mirroring the descent into cognitive decay. By the final stages of Mr. Incredible's transformation, the audio was this incomprehensible mess of eerie noise and silence, like your brain was struggling to make sense of reality. It was weirdly perfect for the trend, turning what could have been just a funny meme into something that was actually a little haunting. Like somehow it kind of made this goofy Pixar dad meme feel existential, like you were staring into the void and it was staring back. But of course, as a reminder, I'm talking about, when we were kids and stuff. This was like a few years ago. This is how it seemed to us when we were kids. But it didn't take long for it to spiral into meme territory. People made versions with other characters like SpongeBob or Giga Chad, but it really never hit quite the same as Mr. Incredible. I don't really know what it was. Maybe it was seeing a Pixar character this beloved become so like fucked, or maybe it's just that cursed content is always internet gold. Like most trends, it eventually burned out, but for a good while, Mr. Incredible becoming uncanny was everywhere. And honestly, it's still kind of hilarious to think about how we collectively decided that this Pixar dad was the perfect face of existential dread. Internet culture is wild like that. SCP Foundation. The SCP Foundation was basically the internet's ultimate rabbit hole for creepy, mind-blowing horror stories. If you were a kid with nothing better to do on a Friday night, scrolling through TikTok or YouTube, this was the kind of thing that found you. You'd start with one video about the scariest SCPs or stumble across a Reddit thread, and before you knew it, you were 3 hours deep into stories about killer statues, weird dimension-hopping IKEA stores, and reality-breaking monsters. The SCP Foundation had this way of making everything feel a little too real. The whole thing is set up like this secret government organization cataloging bizarre anomalies, and it's written like super serious science reports. Like they describe a creature that eats people whole, or a toaster that makes you think you're toast. Yeah, that's a real one. And it would sound like someone's job was just dealing with it every day. It wasn't just scary, it was believable. You'd read an entry and suddenly your brain starts going, wait, could this actually exist? Like if Area 51 exists, could this actually exist? Gen Alpha and Gen Z kids didn't just find SCPs, they lived them. TikToks would pop up with, quote, real SCP sightings, or animations showing what would happen if SCP-173, the one that moves when you blink, was let loose in a school. People made Roblox games where you'd play as security guards running for your life from Shy Guy, SCP-96, and then there were YouTube videos that broke down the lore with creepy music and graphics that made it feel like a true crime documentary, but for monsters. It was immersive, and that's what made it hit so hard. What really freaked out kids, though, was how the SCP Foundation could turn anything into nightmare fuel. Like, imagine walking around in IKEA. Totally normal, right? Not anymore. SCP-3008 is an endless IKEA filled with homicidal employees who chase you when the store closes. Or SCP-173, that statue that doesn't move until you blink and then it's right in your face. It took stuff that you thought was safe and twisted it, so every time you walked past a mannequin or turned off your bedroom lights, you'd feel that little extra chill. Kids love talking about it too, like me when I was a kid. It wasn't just, oh, that's creepy. It was like trading Pokemon cards, but for scary stories. It was like, have you ever heard that one about like an unkillable lizard? Or did you know there's a virus SCP that makes you write about it until you go insane? Everyone really had their favorites, or the ones that they swore were the scariest ever. It was this whole underground club of, I'm not scared, okay, maybe I'm a little scared vibes. The Foundation's fake professionalism just made it scarier. All those redacted black bars and researcher logs made it feel like the stuff the government doesn't want you to know. And of course, there were always those kids claiming that their uncle worked for the SCP Foundation and totally saw SCP-96 in real life. You didn't believe them, but part of you was, just kind of like, what if? The SCP Foundation wasn't just creepy, it was fun creepy. You could dive into the lore, freak yourself out, and then laugh about how much it scared you with your friends. It wasn't trying to scar you for life. Okay, maybe a little, but it made you think about the world differently. Like, what if reality had these cracks in it and we just didn't know? For Gen Z and Gen Alpha kids, the SCP Foundation wasn't just a collection of stories, it was a whole mood, equal parts terrifying and fascinating. And honestly, that's why it's still legendary. Screamer pranks. These are the reason why so many Gen Z and Gen Alpha kids have trust issues when watching YouTube videos or clicking on random links. Like me, bro, I swear to fucking God, every time I click a link from somebody, or any link ever, or a video that seems a little bit too normal to be true, I always fucking like close my eyes a little bit, or I like skip ahead and like, make sure there's not gonna be a fucking screamer. If you don't know what these streamer prank videos are, seriously, how could you not? Screamer pranks were basically the OG internet jump scares. You'd be minding your own business, watching a video like Spot the Difference or Relaxing Maze Game, and then bang, a horrifying face, usually with gross teeth and wide eyes, would pop up on the screen with the loudest, most blood-curdling scream ever. It was the kind of thing that made you accidentally throw your laptop or start crying in front of your friends. These pranks weren't just annoying, they were kind of traumatizing. Gen Z remembers stuff like that viral video of a car peacefully driving down a scenic road, and right when you were starting to relax, boom, a terrifying zombie woman face jumps out at you. If you weren't in on the joke, then it felt like the internet had personally betrayed you. And if you were, you probably enjoyed tricking your siblings or cousins or friends into watching and then laughing your head off when they screamed like banshees. For younger kids, it hit even harder because you were just there, innocently vibing on the family desktop, and suddenly you're scared to walk past dark hallways for a week. These pranks were like digital jump scares and they were everywhere. Even now, you'll see people joking about being scarred by the maze game or getting rickrolled and then hit with a screamer right after. It was the ultimate gotcha move of internet culture, and honestly, it's kind of impressive how something so simple could traumatize an entire generation. Skibbity toilet! If you've spent any time scrolling on TikTok or YouTube Shorts lately, you've probably run into the absolute fever dream that is Skibbity Toilet. Or if you've watched my Iceberg video on it, which if you haven't, go watch that. Yes, it is exactly what it sounds like. Toilets with human heads sticking out of them, singing Skibbity Dop 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 Yes Yes, and causing absolute chaos. It's weird, it's hilarious, and it's honestly a little bit unsettling. Basically, peak Gen Alpha humor. The Skibbity Toilet series comes from YouTube creator Da Fuck Boom, and started out as these short, surreal 3D animations with over-the-top scenes. The premise is a war between the Skibbity Toilets, who are those creepy singing toilet heads, and the camera heads, who are literal humans with cameras for heads. Yeah, it doesn't make sense, but that's kind of the whole point. It's like someone took a random idea generator, cranked it to absolute absurdity, and turned it into a cultural phenomenon. For kids, Skibbity Toilet is weirdly addictive. It's short, fast-paced, and completely unpredictable. Perfect for short attention spans and meme culture, but let's be real, it's also low-key creepy. The human heads sticking out of the toilets are unsettling in that uncanny way, like they belong in some bizarre internet horror short instead of a comedy series. It's not exactly nightmare fuel, but it definitely lives in that weird space where something can be funny, but also a little bit disturbing. Like if you were scrolling late at night and accidentally stumbled upon Skibbity Toilet without knowing what it was, it could freak you out a little bit, especially if you got to one of the more chaotic or intense episodes where the toilets are just screaming. But for most Gen Z and Gen Alpha kids, it's just hilarious in that so dumb is genius kind of way. Skibbity Toilet might not be deep or profound, but it's a perfect example of how random internet trends can blow up and somehow become the thing everyone's talking about, even if no one can explain why. And also, if you're following my Instagram, which by the way, link in the description, go follow that. I went to Target last week and I saw a fucking Skibbity Toilet plush, bro. Look at this shit. The Backrooms. The Backrooms are the perfect mix of creepy and oddly relatable internet horror, which is probably why they hit so hard for Gen Z and Gen Alpha kids. Picture this. You're just walking along, maybe in your house or at school, and suddenly you take one wrong step and poof, you're somewhere else entirely. That somewhere else is the Backrooms, a seemingly endless maze of yellow to damp carpeting, buzzing fluorescent lights, and wallpaper straight out of a 90s dentist office. It's unsettling not just because of what might be lurking there, but because it feels like a place you've almost been to before, aka a liminal space. For Gen Z and Alpha, the Backrooms often started as a viral creepypasta or a TikTok trend where people would joke about no clipping out of reality like in a video game glitch. The original lore was simple but effective. If you somehow slipped out of the real world, you'd get trapped in this liminal, eerie, empty space. And if the environment didn't make you lose your mind, the entities, which were basically creepy monsters with vague descriptions lurking in the shadows, probably would. The idea wasn't just scary, it was also fascinating. It made you think about how fragile reality might be and what could be hiding just outside of it. What really sold the Backrooms to younger audiences was how easy it was to imagine yourself there. It's not like Ghosts or Haunted House where the threat feels external. The Backrooms feel personal. They look like a bad dream you've had, or a weird memory of being in like a furniture store as a kid. That uncanny familiarity made them way scarier because they weren't totally alien. They were like the weird corners of your own mind turned against you. Of course, the internet ran with the idea. People started creating whole stories, games, and even analog horror videos exploring what might happen if you got stuck in the Backrooms. Kane Pixel's YouTube series was a huge part of this, giving the Backrooms a more cinematic, terrifying feel with lore about researchers accidentally creating the space. Watching these videos felt like seeing your own fears brought to life, especially with how the dimly lit hallways and echoing sounds made you feel trapped right alongside the characters. For a lot of Gen Z and Alpha kids, discovering the backrooms was a rite of passage. You'd hear about it on TikTok or Reddit, watch a creepy video at 2 a.m., and then spend the next few nights side-eyeing the corners in your room just in case you somehow no-clipped in your sleep. And if you wanted to scare your friends, all you had to do was send them like a random image of an empty hallway and say, "This looks like the backrooms, doesn't it?" It was one of those internet horror concepts that got under your skin, not because it was overly graphic or violent, but because it felt like it could actually happen to you. A big part of the backrooms is the vibe. Like, you look at an image of the backrooms and it's not creepy or just creepy, it's kind of weirdly sad. It's that kind of loneliness that creeps up on you when you're walking through a school hallway after hours, or when you're in a big, creepy, empty building and you realize just how small you feel in the grand scheme of things. It's less about the outright terror and more about this slow, crawling dread that gets under your skin. That's the kind of horror that really sticks with you. And let's not forget how much community has grown around the backrooms. It's not just a scary story you read and move on from. It's a whole creative universe. People have made levels with their own aesthetics, rules, and threats. There's the iconic level 0, the one with the yellow wallpaper, but then you have all these fan-made levels, like dark industrial spaces, frozen wastelands, or even underwater voids. Every time you think you've seen the scariest version, someone comes out with an even worse one. The way people share and build on each other's ideas makes it feel like you're all collectively exploring this nightmare space. And speaking of nightmares, there's something so Gen Z and Alpha about taking something existentially horrifying and making it a meme. People joke about falling into the back rooms during a boring math class, or no clipping when you trip over a sidewalk crack. It's funny until it's not. Like, sure, you're laughing at the idea, but then you remember those videos where someone's running through an empty parking garage and you get that gnawing feeling in your stomach. The backrooms toe that line between being a joke and being the kind of thing that you think about late at night when it's too quiet. And you would never admit that to your friends that you joke around with. The analog horror trend is another reason why the backrooms are so popular with younger generations. Those grainy VHS style recordings make everything feel way more real and immediate, like you're watching found footage of someone who genuinely got lost in another dimension. Kane Pixels absolutely nailed this with his videos, especially the way he plays with sound. The endless droning hum of the lights in level 0 feels like it's drilling into your skull, and when something moves in the distance, that's when you realize you're holding your breath, even though you're just sitting there watching a YouTube video. The backrooms also hit on that whole liminal spaces obsession, which is a very Gen Z/Gen Alpha thing. There's something about empty malls, old playgrounds, or abandoned offices that taps into this collective nostalgia. Like you've been there before, but you can't remember when. It's not just a horror story, it's an experience that makes you rethink how you interact with spaces in your own life. At the end of the day, the backrooms aren't just about the monsters or the levels, it's about that feeling of being stuck in a place you can't escape, both physically and mentally. And for Gen Z and Gen Alpha, it was pretty fucking sick. Charlie Challenge. The Charlie Challenge was peak middle school sleepover material for Gen Z and early Gen Alpha. It wasn't just a trend, it was practically a rite of passage to try out at least once, usually late at night and with your friends in the dark, trying not to freak out. The whole thing exploded in 2015 when social media turned it into a viral challenge. Suddenly, every kid with access to a pencil and some paper was summoning Charlie, a supposedly demonic spirit who would answer your yes or no questions. You didn't need a Ouija board or candles, just the nerve to test it out and hope you didn't accidentally curse yourself forever. The setup was super simple, which is part of why it caught on so fast. You draw a cross on a piece of paper, write yes and no in the opposite corners, balance one pencil on top of another, and ask, "Charlie, are you there?" If the top pencil moved toward yes, it meant that Charlie was in the room. What made this so wild was how unpredictable the pencil movements could be. Like half the time it was probably just gravity or a slight breeze, but when you're 12 and desperate for anything spooky to happen, that pencil wiggling even just a little feels like solid proof of the supernatural. What made the challenge feel even more legit and terrifying was the urban legend surrounding it. Kids would say that Charlie is a vengeful spirit from Mexico, although that part was totally made up. There's no folklore behind it. But that didn't matter when you were in the moment. The challenge leaned into that don't mess with the unknown energy, and kids genuinely freaked themselves out thinking they'd summon something that they couldn't control. And then let's talk about their reactions. The challenge was basically a goldmine for social media content. There were countless TikToks, Vines, RIP, and YouTube videos of kids screaming and running out of their rooms because the pencil moved, or even just because someone joked about hearing a noise in the hallway. It became less about whether Charlie was real and more about who could get the most dramatic reaction for clout. If you weren't brave enough to try it yourself, you definitely watched other people do it online, laughing at their panic while low-key getting creeped out too. Of course, there was also that one kid in every group who took it way too seriously, saying, "You can't just stop the game, you have to say goodbye to Charlie or he'll stay with you forever." That kid always made it worse, bro, especially if they started adding their own rules like, if the pencil breaks, it means Charlie's sad. It wasn't just a game, it became a whole psychological trip that stuck with you long after the pencils were put away. For a lot of kids, the Charlie challenge was their first real introduction to the thrill of messing with the paranormal. It wasn't just about being scared, it was about feeling like you were in control of something dangerous, even if it was all a big joke. And let's be real, even if you didn't totally believe in Charlie, there was always that tiny part of you wondering, what if this is real? And that's what made it so unforgettable, and why it'll probably always be one of those iconic internet scares that lives rent-free in Gen Z and Gen Alpha's collective memory. Mandela Catalog. The Mandela Catalog is one of those internet phenomena that feels like it came straight out of the darkest corners of Gen Z's collective imagination. If you were a kid in the late 2010s or early 2020s, and into creepy online rabbit holes, chances are you stumbled across this series, or at least heard about it. Created by Alex Kister and launched on YouTube in 2021, it is this mind-bending mix of analog horror and biblical references, with a whole lot of uncanny, paranoia-inducing vibes that hit differently late at night. The setup is deceptively simple but terrifying in how it gets under your skin. The story revolves around a world plagued by alternates, which are basically shape-shifting creatures that mimic people. They don't just replace their victims physically, they mess with their minds first, driving them to insanity, or worse, which I'm sure you can assume without me saying it. The Mandela Catalog takes that fear of not knowing who or what you can trust and cranks it up to 11. It is the kind of horror that doesn't rely on jump scares, but on building this overwhelming sense of dread, which is way scarier. For Gen Z and Alpha kids, the Mandela Catalog was peak found footage horror, but it wasn't trying too hard to sell itself as real. It didn't need to. The grainy VHS style visuals, distorted audio, and old school public service announcement vibes made it feel unsettlingly authentic. And that authenticity hit a sweet spot for kids who grew up on the internet where creepy ARGs, or alternate reality games, and analog horror are already a thing. It wasn't just scary, it felt like something you shouldn't be watching. The series played perfectly into the fear of being watched or manipulated, which is such a modern, relatable anxiety for kids growing up in the age of social media and surveillance. The idea that an alternate could replace someone you know, or even you, was enough to send chills down your spine. And then there's the religious angle. The Mandela Catalog reimagines biblical stories like the fall of Lucifer in a way that's deeply unnerving. For a generation that's increasingly questioning traditional narratives, and maybe just a little obsessed with angel-demon aesthetics, this was like candy for the existentially curious. Part of the series' genius is how it leverages audio to mess with your head. The voice distortions, eerie whispers, and unnatural glitches stick with you long after the video ends. It doesn't help that the characters in the series often experience a slow, inescapable descent into paranoia and despair. That lingering sense of doom is exactly what makes the Mandela Catalog hit so hard. For younger audiences, it wasn't really just entertainment, it was nightmare fuel. And also, let's not forget the memes. The Mandela Catalog became a breeding ground for inside jokes and creepy edits across TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Things like the uncanny think principle or that terrifying grin on the face of an alternate became instantly recognizable among fans. People would recreate scenes, remix audio, or even try to make their own Mandela-inspired horror videos. For Gen Z and Alpha who grew up watching YouTube, this series was part of the wave that redefined what horror could look like. It wasn't big-budget Hollywood, it was a kid with a creative idea and a laptop, and somehow that made it even scarier. It made you wonder, what if something like this really could happen? And honestly, that's the scariest part of all. The Mandela Catalog wasn't just a story, it was an experience that left you checking over your shoulder and rethinking every glitchy video or distorted voice you've ever heard. One of the reasons why the Mandela Catalog really stuck with people is how it played on those unspoken fears we all have but don't talk about enough. You know, like when you're home alone and hear a creak down the hall, or when you look in the mirror for too long and start to wonder if your reflection is off. That's the energy this series thrives on. It's not about showing you a monster up front, It's about making you feel like the monster could already be there, watching, waiting. And honestly, that's scarier than any jump scare. And what's wild is how relatable the whole don't trust your surroundings concept is, especially for younger viewers who grew up with the constant hum of the internet. You're scrolling TikTok at 2 a.m. and suddenly there's a weird glitch in a video. Normally you would just laugh it off, but after watching the Mandela catalog, you can't help but think, what if that's not just a glitch? What if it's something else? It doesn't help that the alternates look human, but are just a little too wrong. The elongated faces, the crooked smiles, it's creepy as fuck. It's nightmare fuel because it's familiar enough to creep into your head and stick there. And let's talk about the fear of technology that this series absolutely nails. Gen Z and Alpha are digital natives, so when you see things like distorted emergency alerts or hacked security footage in the Mandela catalog, it hits different. It's like, what if your Alexa, your phone, or even your FaceTime call isn't as innocent as it seems? The series plays with this idea that the tools you trust to keep you safe, your phone, your TV, your friends, can all turn against you. It's paranoia perfectly packaged for a generation that's already halfway convinced that their devices are spying on them. And like, they kinda are, but that's a whole other conversation. And then there's the religious horror. For a lot of viewers, the idea of angels and demons isn't new, but the Mandela catalog takes it to a completely unhinged level. Instead of the comforting guardian angel trope, you're introduced to these distorted, terrifying entities that claim to be divine, but definitely aren't here to help. It's unsettling in the best way because it takes something sacred and flips it upside down. Even if you're not super religious, the idea of beings with that much power being outright malicious is chilling. For some, it even had them looking at religious imagery differently. Like, okay, maybe that stained glass angel in church isn't so comforting anymore. For a lot of Gen Z and Gen Alpha kids, the Mandela catalog was a lot more than just scary content. It was an entry point into analog horror as a genre. It made you curious about other series like Local 58, which we're getting to, or The Walton Files, and it opened up this whole other world of eerie, lo-fi storytelling. It was proof that you didn't need a massive budget or Hollywood backing to make something that could freak people out. You just needed a good idea and the internet. And at the end of the day, the Mandela catalog wasn't just a YouTube series, it was kind of a whole vibe. It made you question everything, your reflection, your friends, and even the weird static on your TV. And for a generation that thrives on constantly sharing their reactions, it became one of those shared experiences, where you'd send a link to a friend and say, watch this, but don't blame me if you can't sleep tonight. It wasn't just horror, it was fun to be scared by it, and that's why it hit so hard. Local 58. If you've ever gone down a YouTube rabbit hole at midnight and stumbled onto Local 58, then congratulations. You've probably experienced the exact moment when your night went from just chilling to, okay, I'm sleeping with the lights on. This analog horror series hits different because it messes with something we all know and trust, local TV broadcasts. Like, sure, we all know cable TV is basically extinct at this point, but Local 58 is here to make you rethink ever trusting that fuzzy screen again. The whole vibe of Local 58 feels like flipping through channels late at night and landing on something that you definitely weren't supposed to see. Each episode is styled like an old school public access broadcast or emergency alert, but instead of weather updates or news bulletins, you get pure nightmare fuel. It's the kind of stuff that makes you think, why the hell is this on TV? Followed immediately by, why am I still watching this? What really sold Local 58 to Gen Z and Alpha kids is how it taps into that specific fear of the unknown. Like, imagine you're scrolling through TikTok and you stumble onto a clip with a caption that's like, this aired at 2 a.m. and it was never explained. You click it and boom, it's an episode of Local 58 showing some cryptic warning about the moon not being safe, or like a station ID glitching out into chaos. It feels cursed, but you can't stop watching because your brain is just screaming, what the fuck does it mean? The moon episode Contingency is probably the one that sent the most shivers down spines. It starts off with this calm, robotic voice explaining a supposed emergency plan, and you're thinking, okay, it's just a government PSA, no big deal. But then it takes a turn, telling citizens to unalive themselves rather than let the invaders win. This shift from cold professionalism to outright horror is so smooth, and you barely even notice it coming, until you're sitting there wide-eyed wondering how a fictional show feels so real. And don't even get me started on weather service with the moon supposedly looking down at you. The idea that the moon could be malevolent is wild, but also kind of believable. Thanks for the existential crisis, Local 58. Another thing that hit so hard for Gen Z and Alpha viewers was the aesthetic. The grainy visuals, the static interruptions, the weird old-timey jingles. It's got that retro liminal space vibe that we can't seem to get enough of. It's like watching a horror version of watching those weird VHS tapes you found in your grandma's attic. For a lot of people, that aesthetic is nostalgic and comforting, but Local 58 weaponizes it to make you feel uneasy instead. It's genius because it tricks your brain into letting its guard down, and then hits you with existential terror. And of course, the internet had a field day with theories. Everyone wanted to dissect what the series meant, from speculating about an alien invasion to unraveling the possible backstory of a rogue TV station. If you were part of those Tumblr or Reddit deep dives, you probably saw people connecting Local 58 to everything from the Mandela catalog to actual conspiracy theories about government mind control. It became less just watching the series and more about being part of this massive online puzzle. But let's be real, the scariest part of Local 58 is how plausible it feels. Sure, we don't really watch local TV anymore, but the idea that a trusted source of information could be hijacked is way too real for comfort. Like, what if your phone's emergency alert went off one day, but instead of warning you about a storm, it told you to hide from the moon? You'd freak out, right? And Local 58 knows that. It plays with that fear, that tiny voice in the back of your head that whispers, what if this actually happened? At the end of the day, Local 58 is scary because it's subtle. It doesn't need jump scares or gore to get under your skin. It just shows you something slightly off and lets your imagination do the rest. For Gen Z and Alpha kids, it's the perfect blend of old school creepiness and modern internet culture. You watch it, freak out a little, and then immediately send it to your friends with a message like, dude, this is so fucked up. Watch it now. Alright guys, that was the Gen Alpha Internet Trauma Iceberg. Really hope you like this one, guys. This one was hella fun to make. I love these, internet type icebergs. So let me know if you want more of this. Let me know in the comments just basically what you want at all. And I want to make stuff that you guys want to see, obviously. So yeah, just let me know.